"Daddy, why is she sleeping here?" my little girl asked, tugging at my coat as we passed a snowy bench that night. I followed her gaze and froze. There, curled under a thin blanket, was a young woman clutching a baby, her body shivering against the cold. I'm Michael, a billionaire widower, and in that moment my 6-year-old's innocent question pierced me deeper than any boardroom betrayal. I thought I had everything: power, wealth, control, but nothing prepared me for the choice I made. That night, I thought I was rescuing her. I didn't know she'd rescue me. Before I tell you how one snowy night changed my life forever, let me ask you something. If your child begged you to help a stranger, someone cold, homeless, with a baby in her arms, would you keep walking or open your home? Share your answer in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true stories. My name is Michael Turner. I'm 42 years old, a billionaire businessman, and most importantly, a single father. To most of the world, I'm known for my tech empire, an empire worth billions. But behind the headlines, behind the glass walls of my penthouse, I'm just a man trying to fill a silence that money cannot touch. 3 years ago, I lost my wife, Emily. Cancer took her in a way that was both cruel and swift, leaving me with nothing but a daughter who had her eyes and her smile. Kelly was only 3 when Emily passed. Now she is 6, bright, curious, and far wiser than her age. She is the heartbeat of my world, the only reason I get out of bed each morning. Still, even with Kelly's laughter filling the halls, there's a hollowness in my life that refuses to leave. My house is vast, perched high above the city, with a skyline view most people dream of, but to me, it often feels like a gilded cage. Marble floors echo with emptiness, and even when staff bustle around, it doesn't change the fact that when the night ends, it's just Kelly and me, and the ghost of Emily's absence. I tried to hide that emptiness from Kelly. I wanted her to have a childhood filled with warmth, not grief. Every December, I'd take her to see the Christmas lights in Rockefeller Plaza, just as Emily and I once did. I thought keeping that tradition alive would be enough to make us both feel whole. That particular night was no different. At least, it wasn't supposed to be. The air was crisp, the streets alive with carolers and holiday shoppers, lights twinkling like stars strung across the city. Kelly's mittened hand slipped into mine as we walked, her eyes wide as they always were. When the giant Christmas tree came into view, "Daddy, look at the lights," she exclaimed, her voice bubbling with excitement. She pointed upward, her cheeks red from the cold, her breath forming little clouds in the air. I smiled, though my chest ached. "Beautiful, isn't it?" She nodded eagerly. "It's like magic. We wandered for a while, sipping hot cocoa from paper cups, watching skaters twirl on the ice. People around us laughed, hugged, and kissed under mistletoe. For a brief moment, I felt like maybe Emily was walking beside us, her hand brushing against mine, her laugh carried in the winter wind. But the illusion shattered when Kelly suddenly tugged at my coat and pointed toward the shadows of a nearby bench. "Daddy, why is she sleeping here?" At first I didn't understand. Then my eyes followed her finger and I saw, there under the dim glow of a street lamp, a young woman sat hunched over, her arms wrapped around something small. A baby. Her blanket was thin, her shoes worn, her face pale from the cold. She looked like she was holding on to her child with the last strength she had. For a moment I froze. In my world, poverty was something I passed in headlines, not in my path. My instinct was to turn away, to protect Kelly from the sight. But Kelly's eyes never left the woman. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "She has a baby. Why is no one helping her?" Her question cut through me. What could I say? That the world was cruel, that sometimes people slipped through the cracks, that money built walls around people like me, walls so high we rarely looked down at who was Struggling below, I opened my mouth, but nothing came out, and then Kelly tugged harder on my hand, her little voice urgent. "Daddy, we have to help her." In that instant, I realized my daughter was seeing what I couldn't. She didn't see a stranger. She saw a mother, she saw a child, and she saw something I had buried under years of business deals and bored. Meetings, simple, human compassion. I took a step toward the bench. That step would change everything. The closer we stepped to the bench, the clearer the picture became. The young woman couldn't have been more than 25. Her hair was tangled, her cheeks hollow from hunger, her lips cracked from the cold. The baby in her arms whimpered weakly, its tiny fingers clutching her coat as though holding on for life itself. She startled when she saw us. Her eyes widened in fear, like a deer caught in headlights. She clutched the baby tighter and tried to shield him from view. "It's okay," I said gently, raising my hands. "We're not here to hurt you." Her voice was barely a whisper. Please, just go. I'm fine." But she wasn't fine, not by any definition of the word. Her whole body shook as though her bones themselves were trembling. Kelly tugged at my coat again. "Daddy, she needs help." I crouched slightly, keeping my voice calm. "What's your name?" She hesitated. "Grace." "And his?" I asked, nodding toward the baby. "Noah," she whispered, rocking him gently. The baby's cry broke me. It wasn't the cry of frustration or fussiness I'd heard with Kelly as a child. It was weak, exhausted, almost hopeless. I shrugged off my overcoat and draped it over Grace and Noah. She stiffened but didn't push it away. "You'll both freeze if you stay out here," I said firmly. "Come with us, just for tonight. My daughter's right, you need help." Grace shook her head, her eyes darting. "I don't want charity." "This isn't charity," I replied softly. "It's survival." She looked at me for a long moment, then at Kelly, whose big brown eyes were filled with pleading innocence. Slowly, reluctantly, Grace nodded. We walked back to the car, Grace clutching Noah, wrapped now in my coat. The driver's eyebrows shot up when he saw her, but I silenced his questions with one look. Inside the warm vehicle, Kelly leaned close, peering at the baby. "Hi, Noah," she whispered. "Don't cry. You're safe now." Grace's eyes softened, her guard lowering just slightly. "He hasn't been safe in a long time," she murmured. The ride to the penthouse was silent, except for the hum of the engine and Noah's soft whimpers. I could feel Grace's tension radiating beside me, but I also saw something else: relief. When we arrived, I led them through the marble lobby. The staff turned to look, surprise written all over their faces. I didn't explain. Not yet. As the elevator doors closed behind us, I caught Grace staring at the mirrored walls, her reflection almost unrecognizable to herself. By the time we stepped into my home, the warmth of the penthouse engulfed us. Grace blinked against the light, clutching Noah as if afraid someone would snatch him away. "This is your home," she whispered. "For now," I said, meeting her eyes. "It's yours too." The reaction came quickly. Margaret, my longtime housekeeper, appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. She froze at the sight of Grace and the baby. "Sir," she said carefully. "Who is this?" "This is Grace," I explained, my tone leaving no room for argument, "and her son Noah. They'll be staying with us tonight." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. She looked Grace up and down, then back at me. "With all due respect, Mr. Turner, we don't know them. Bringing strangers—" Kelly interrupted, her little voice sharp. "She's not a stranger, Margaret. She's Noah's mommy, and Noah's my friend." Margaret sighed, clearly torn, but she nodded and went to prepare a guest room. I showed Grace into the living area. She hesitated at the doorway, overwhelmed by the chandelier, the sprawling view of the city through the glass walls, the expensive furniture. She whispered almost to herself, "I don't belong here." "You belong where you're safe," I said quietly. She perched on the edge of the sofa, holding Noah tightly, as though expecting someone to tell her to leave at any second. When the doctor arrived to check Noah, Grace looked like she wanted to bolt. But I assured her he was a family physician I trusted. After a quick exam, the doctor nodded. Just a mild fever, dehydration. Rest and warmth will do wonders. Grace exhaled a breath of relief. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes glistening. Later, when Noah finally drifted to sleep in the crib Margaret had hurriedly set up, Grace sat by the window, staring at the skyline. Her voice was raw. "Why are you doing this? People don't just take strangers home." I thought of Kelly's innocent question, the way her little hand had tugged mine, because my daughter reminded me that sometimes we forget what matters. "You needed help. I could give it. That's enough." Grace looked down at her hands, silent for a long moment. Finally, she whispered, "No one's ever said that to me before." The first night passed in uneasy silence. Grace barely slept, sitting upright beside the crib as if afraid Noah would be taken from her. I noticed the way her shoulders stiffened whenever footsteps echoed in the hall. She was still in survival mode, as though warmth and safety were foreign concepts that could be snatched away at any moment. By morning, Kelly had already taken it upon herself to fix things. She padded into the guest room in her pajamas, carrying her crayons and coloring pad. "Do you like to draw?" she asked brightly. Grace blinked at her. "I used to," she admitted softly. "Then you can draw with me," Kelly declared. She plopped down on the carpet, spreading out her crayons. At first, Grace hesitated, but slowly she took a crayon, her hand trembling as though unused to holding something so simple. She began to sketch. What started as tentative lines grew into graceful strokes, a glimpse of real talent emerging. I stood quietly in the doorway, watching. Kelly was giggling, Grace was smiling faintly for the first time, and Noah was sleeping peacefully in the crib. For the first time in years, my home didn't feel hollow. It felt alive. Later that day, I found Grace in the kitchen, trying to help Margaret prepare lunch. Margaret eyed her warily, but Grace insisted on peeling vegetables. "I can't just sit here and do nothing," she murmured. Kelly clapped her hands when Grace brought the food to the table. "You made this? It's yummy." Grace's cheeks flushed with pride. Over the following weeks, a subtle transformation took place. Grace began to relax. She laughed more with Kelly, sometimes humming softly while feeding Noah. She even helped Margaret with chores, earning the housekeeper's grudging respect. One evening, as I worked late in my study, Kelly ran in carrying a drawing. "Look, Daddy," she said. The paper showed 4 stick figures, a tall man, a little girl, a woman with long hair, and a baby. "That's us! Me, you, Grace, and Noah!" My chest tightened. "It's beautiful," I said, ruffling her hair. Kelly tilted her head. "Are we a family now?" Her innocent question hung in the air long after she skipped out of the room. That night, Grace found me in the study. She hesitated before speaking. "I never told you. I studied art once. Before Noah. Before everything fell apart. My parents didn't approve. When I got pregnant, they told me to leave. I thought I could manage, but..." Her voice cracked. "I ended up on that bench." I looked at her sketches, left on the desk by Kelly. "You still have a gift," I said firmly. "Don't let anyone take that from you." For a moment, our eyes met. There was a spark of something fragile but real. Hope. Just when the house felt like it had finally found balance, the storm hit. It started one night with Noah's fever. At first, Grace thought it was nothing, a warm forehead, a restless cry. But within hours, his skin was burning, his little body trembling with chills. Grace panicked. He's not breathing right. Michael, please. I rushed in, scooping the baby into my arms. His breaths came shallow and fast, his eyelids fluttering. Memories of hospitals, of Emily's final days, crashed over me like a wave. I couldn't lose another person I loved. Not again. I called the doctor immediately, but he warned us, "You need to get him to the hospital now." My phone buzzed at the same time, a reminder, a board meeting with international investors, the kind of meeting that could shift billions, secure the future of my empire. Missing it could mean disaster. I stared at the screen, then at Noah's tiny body against my chest, his face pale and damp with sweat. Kelly clung to my sleeve, her eyes wide with fear. "Daddy," she whispered, "please don't let him die. The decision wasn't hard. For once in my life, business could wait. Family couldn't." I cancelled the meeting with a single text and drove Grace and Noah to the hospital myself. Every red light felt like a lifetime. Grace sobbed quietly in the back seat, whispering prayers as she stroked Noah's hair. At the emergency room, doctors rushed him away. I held Grace back as she cried, my own chest splitting apart with helplessness. Kelly held my hand tightly, her small fingers trembling. Hours dragged on. I paced the cold hallway, my mind racing with memories of Emily hooked up to machines, the sound of monitors beeping in the night. Kelly finally fell asleep against my shoulder. Grace sat with her face buried in her hands, whispering Noah's name like a mantra. Finally, a doctor emerged. "He's stable. The fever broke. You brought him just in time." Grace collapsed into tears of relief. I closed my eyes, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. As I watched Grace cradle Noah in her arms, her tears soaking his blanket, I knew one thing for certain. I hadn't saved her that night on the bench. I'd saved myself from a life of emptiness, from forgetting what love really meant. Noah's recovery marked a shift none of us could ignore. For days, the house had been tense, filled with whispered prayers and sleepless nights. When the doctor finally cleared him to return home, Grace clung to my arm, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "You saved him," she whispered. I shook my head. "No, we all did. You fought for him, Kelly prayed for him, and Noah's stronger than any of us realized." Back at the penthouse, Grace was different. Something inside her had changed. She moved with new energy, a quiet determination that wasn't there before. Instead of shrinking in the background, she began to bloom. One evening I came home to find her at the dining table, sketching while Noah napped. The lines on her paper weren't just doodles, they were breathtaking portraits, alive with emotion. "You did this?" I asked, stunned. She blushed. "I used to dream of being an artist, but dreams don't feed babies." I studied the drawing, a portrait of Kelly laughing, her innocence captured perfectly in a few strokes. "Grace, this is more than a dream. This is a gift." She looked away, but I could see the spark in her eyes. That weekend, I called an old friend, Laura, who owned a well-known art gallery downtown. I invited her to dinner and quietly showed her Grace's sketches. Laura's eyes widened. "Michael, this work is extraordinary. She has raw talent, real emotion. I could showcase this." When Laura offered Grace a chance to display her art, Grace nearly dropped her pencil. "You're serious?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Completely," Laura said. "Your story, your work, it will speak to people." Grace hesitated, fear flickering across her face. "What if people laugh at me?" I stepped forward. "Then they'll laugh. But you won't fail, Grace. Not anymore. You've already survived. Worse than rejection. This time, you'll win." The gallery night arrived weeks later. Grace wore a simple dress Kelly had picked for her, her hands shaking as she stood among her framed sketches. The room filled with art lovers, critics, and investors. Murmurs rippled as they studied her work. Some paused, staring for long minutes. Others wiped at their eyes, touched by the raw emotion captured in graphite and ink. When Laura introduced her, Grace's voice trembled at first. But then she looked at Noah in my arms, at Kelly grinning proudly, and something inside her steadied. "Name is Grace," she said softly. "For a long time I thought my life was over, but sometimes kindness finds you when you least expect it. These drawings are pieces of my journey, from despair to hope." The audience erupted into applause. Grace's cheeks flushed, her eyes wet with tears she didn't hide this time. I felt Kelly slip her hand into mine. "Daddy," she whispered, "she's smiling." And in that moment, I realized what we had built together wasn't charity, or obligation, or even coincidence. It was family, messy, unexpected, but real. Months passed, and the penthouse no longer felt like a museum of silence. It was filled with laughter, with baby giggles, with the sound of pencils scratching against paper as Grace sketched at the dining table. Kelly thrived with Noah beside her, proudly calling him her baby brother. Margaret, once skeptical, now fussed over both children as though they were her own grandchildren. Even I, a man who had measured life in quarterly reports and stock values, began to measure it instead in bedtime stories, family dinners, and small, perfect moments. One evening, Kelly tugged at my sleeve while we decorated the Christmas tree. She held up a drawing, another family portrait, more detailed than the last. This time, the figures weren't stick people. They were us. Kelly, me, Grace, and Noah. She looked up at me with those wide, honest eyes. "Daddy, are we a family now?" I glanced at Grace, who was hanging an ornament just above Noah's crib. She looked back, her eyes soft, her lips curved in a smile filled with quiet certainty. I pulled Kelly into my arms, my throat tightening. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "We're a family now." Grace's eyes shimmered as she stepped closer, Noah gurgling happily in her arms. In that moment everything aligned. The pain of the past, the chance encounter on a snowy night, the choice to stop and listen to my daughter's question. The emptiness that had haunted me for years was gone. What filled its place was stronger, warmer, unbreakable. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were whole. The following Christmas, the city glowed once again with lights and music. But this year, we didn't stand as outsiders, looking in. We walked together as a family. Kelly skipping ahead, Noah bundled safely in Grace's arms, and me walking beside them with a heart fuller than I'd ever known possible. We passed the same bench where Grace and Noah had once shivered in the cold. Grace paused, her eyes lingering on it. Then she looked up at me, smiling. "That night feels like a lifetime ago." I nodded. "Because it was the night everything changed." Kelly tugged at my hand, pointing at the tree sparkling above the plaza. "Daddy, it's even prettier this year." I looked at her, at Grace, at Noah, and realized she was right. The lights hadn't changed. I had. Sometimes life doesn't give you the family you expect. Sometimes it gives you the one you need in the most unexpected way. As we stood there, I thought about Emily. I knew she would be smiling too, knowing her daughter had not only a father, but also a mother figure and a little brother to grow up with. That night, under the glow of the Christmas tree, I finally felt complete. And now, I want to ask you, have you ever taken a leap of kindness that changed your life? Share your story in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more true stories like this.